So education consultant CHINENYE MBA-UZOUKWU joins us now from our Lagos studio. CHINENYE, good evening and welcome to Newsnight again. Okay, now let's start with the fact that over 600 schools have been closed. You are an education consultant. You understand the implication of children not being out of school. What do you make of this in terms of the numbers?
Kaide, it's one of those things that we have to almost like come to terms with. There's a crisis that we're in, and my view is that we need to just recognize the crisis more or less in the same way that we recognize COVID-19 as an existential threat. We need to understand that the current security situation in the country, until taken care of, presents an existential crisis to children in school. And so we have to make some tough calls. And as terrible as it may seem, this is really the question that faces us. Can we as parents, as responsible adults, as members of government, send children to school without the assurance that we can actually protect them in those schools? If the answer to that is no, then we have to kind of like come to terms with that reality and just address the central issue that a child cannot leave home without the assurance that the child will come back and see the parents alive. We do not want body bags going back to people's homes. So I think we are in a crisis and we have to address it that way as an emergency.
It is definitely an emergency, because if we look back to even before the lockdown that we saw school children stay home for a long period of time, we had about almost 14 million out of school children, and unfortunately more than 80% of that number were actually in the north. Let's talk about the implication, of this on not just the students, but the fact that the competitiveness, especially when you put students from northern Nigeria side by side by students, from other parts of the country.
It's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. And you're 100% correct. I don't mean to downplay the implications of doing this, but the first thing we say is, often we say it and sometimes we say it facetiously, but we actually mean it, that life comes first. And that's the reality. There's no point of talking about an education or loss of learning in the context where life is at stake. And here's the situation. We need to, and I think I kind of like put this, I think when I was here last I spoke about this. I've been an advocate and I continue to be an advocate for shutting the schools. The reason why I feel that the schools have to be shut is because they are largely, these things are happening largely in boarding schools. If you look at the way boarding schools are set up, they were not set up within the city centers. Our policy through the years and through the decades has been to build these schools outside of city centers. By implication, it means that they are soft targets for these bandits. And so you cannot deploy security forces to protect schools and protect schools alone. It's almost impossible, because you're bringing these children together, aggregating them in places that are in some cases quite remote from wherever it is that the security forces can get to. So they're sitting targets. The Safe Schools Initiative, one of the functions of the Safe School Initiative as planned was fencing the schools. A fence is not going to stop these bandits, given the kind of weapons that they have. So the real question that we have to ask ourselves is, can we protect the children in school? If the answer is no, or is a partial yes, then we have to make adjustments. And that's what I'm arguing for, that we have to accept that. The secondary question is, is there going to be learning loss? The answer is yes, there'll be learning loss. How do we mitigate that? That's a different question. How do you mitigate the learning loss? And there are options that are available to us, but we have to invest differently. We have to think differently about the education model. And we have to say to ourselves that during this period of crisis, during this emergency, what we need to do is to take unconventional means of addressing what is a problem. And again, I call us back to the COVID situation. We were in COVID, the children couldn't go to school. What happened? This has been the greatest burst of creativity in the Nigerian system, education system, in response to a crisis. Why can't we take the same approach and look at this issue of insecurity in the north and ask ourselves what needs to be done that we have not done before, that we can do differently, that will preserve the lives of these children, reduce the risk of these bandits attacking them, and at the same time deliver some level of learning to them? Those questions need to be answered, and that's really what our focus should be on. But you're 100% correct. For an educationally disadvantaged zone, to be under the kind of siege that the children are under and the schools are under, the teachers are under, is a real tragedy in itself. And it's not going to help matters. I mean, the latest unemployment results came out, and you can see that within the age range of 15 to 24, so 50% unemployment.
Okay. Chinenye,
this is just going to exacerbate the issue. Yeah.
Okay, let me jump in there. I was just listening to what you're saying, and I'm looking at what looks like a solution that you're putting on the table in terms of the ingenuity that went with the COVID-19 situation and how the schools, especially in the southwest of the country, and how they have transformed. Do you think this is feasible or possible in the northern part of Nigeria, where there is a level of poverty that is far beyond what we experience in the southern part of the country? The parents, can they afford that? And also the issue of illiteracy across board for parents in that region. Can they possibly afford internet and all the other things that the people in the south are able to use?
Kari, there's a big opportunity here, and unfortunately, in the crisis, you have to ask yourself, what can we do to mitigate? But I really believe that there's an opportunity. Before this time, I mean, I started my business with e-learning about 25 years ago, and everybody said it was impossible. It took COVID for people to start talking about technology and education. Now you've got a security crisis. The children cannot go to school, should not be aggregated in those schools. You're shutting the schools. You send them back home to do what? If they're living with parents who are themselves illiterate, what is the only way in which you can give them a chance, a shot at getting some education and not losing the entire period until the insurgency is capped? Of course, there's only one way. You're not going to transform an illiterate parent into a teacher overnight. You're also not going to deploy teachers into all those villages. Clearly, the solution has to go to use technology. And again, I know I sound like a broken record. I've been a broken record for over 30 years. That's okay. But the crisis we have now is simple. You have to give these children the same kind of tools that their counterparts in the Southwest and the Southeast have had to combat COVID, and let them take learning home. They are better off with the tablets that has all their lessons, has language lessons, has physics, has all those things, has the chemistry labs and all those things on videos on those tablets, and you refresh the content on those tablets, then they are not doing anything at all. Traditionally, you'd find that particularly in the north, a child usually has a radio. Even the nomadic children carry radios, and they get learning through those radios. Why can't we think about it for this period and just say, okay, you know what? The next 1 year is going to be a year where we're going to aggressively address the security threat. And our children are not going to be left vulnerable in schools. Let's over-invest in putting in their hands the technology that they require, from radios to tablets, right? For them to be able to, which are learning devices, for them to be able to have access to education wherever they are. At least they will be at home and not exposed, not aggregated in the
Well, Chinenye, you've made really valid points there, speaking about the fact that there is an opportunity here for us to actually move with the entire world, really, and think technology to get our kids back to learning. Chinenye, we would have to say thank you so much for joining us tonight on the program.